Hi everyone, let's talk about food shortages. So first we must understand the concept of food security, which combines three things: the accessibility, the type of food, and also the use of the food. When we combine them, we get the definition of when all people at all times have access to sufficient, safe, nutritious, and affordable food to maintain an active lifestyle. So all people at all times is your accessibility, the type of food is sufficient, safe, nutritious, and affordable, and the use of the food is to maintain an active lifestyle. So we can move on to causes and consequences. And remember, guys, remember your examples. So for most of these factors, you might want to have examples to impress the examiners, put them in your exams, such as some events of a drought, a flood, pests, wars, maybe starvation, migration. Some examples so that you can put in your exams to really up-level your essays and your answers. But maybe for some niche ones, such as soil exhaustion or low capital investments, these things that quite require you really deep details and memorizing, maybe you don't need them, but especially for major ones like floods, you definitely do. So this can be from personal experience, from reading the news, or just from what I say over here. I'll give you some examples, but just use the ones that best suit you, the ones you can remember the most. So soil exhaustion is overusing the soil. You plant crops over and over again that take out the nutrients from the soil. You don't leave the land fallow. You don't plant crops that put nutrients back into the soil. So you overuse the soil until all the nutrients have been exhausted away. So when you try to plant new crops, they don't grow at all because they can't. There's no nutrients to support their growth, which means you don't have a harvest and you can't feed your population. Droughts are prolonged periods of little rainfall, so very dry periods. And when you don't have water, you have little water, it's very difficult to grow crops, grow vegetation. Events such as the 1788 droughts in France that caused the French Revolution is an example. Tropical cyclones such as Typhoon Rai or Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines, they wiped out yields, they brought water on, they oversaturated the soil, and brought salt water in as well, that prevents the further crops from growing. That is similar to floods such as the 2004 Asian tsunami, wiped out yields, salinated the soils so that it can't really grow more crops. That leads to food shortages. Pests such as locusts in the Horn of Africa, like Ethiopia, they eat up all your crops. So when you do plant them, you do grow your crops, but they get eaten up. You don't have any crops to feed your population. Diseases like fungal diseases, they infect your crops. They make it unedible, make your crops die. They can spread really quickly because they're all the similar crops, and therefore your yields get wiped out entirely. Low capital investments, essentially very little purchasing of machinery like tractors or maybe fertilizers or some type of irrigation technique. You have low investment in such, and therefore you don't have high productivity. You maybe get a few crops, but that's just to feed yourself, not to feed a growing population. A rising population is another issue. So in Bangladesh, you have 171 million population, and it's still growing. And what this means is you need to grow more food for your population, but if your food production remains the same, then higher population, higher demand for food, but you can't feed the population, you get food shortages. Wars-wise, wars such as World War II, World War One, any sort of war basically. Number one, they take farmers away to maybe be conscripted, so you have less farmers working in the farms. Some farmers might flee because of the conflict, and therefore they don't work in farms. Also, the army will take a lot of agricultural products, so for your civilian population, you get food shortages as well because of war. Biofuels-wise, generally it is much more profitable to produce biofuels, so a lot of your land use for agricultural land use is swapped away, transferred to producing biofuels rather than producing food, and that leads to decrease in food production and therefore food shortages. Poor distribution, if you have a lot of food in one area but you cannot distribute it, such as Russia during the 1900s, the early 1900s, you don't have railways and stuff, you don't have infrastructure. If it's just concentrated in one area, you get food shortages in areas that can't be given the food in surpluses. Whereas consequences, what happens when you do have food shortages? Sometimes you get starvation. So in the Great Famine in China in 1960s, there were some 30 million deaths because you have low energy, so you can't work. You might get diseases and stuff, or you just die from lack of energy because of starvation. On the other hand, you might get malnutrition. So food shortages, they don't have to kill you. You can get some food to make sure you're still alive, but you're not getting the nutritious food. So you're only getting one nutrient or something. Examples like kwashiorkor in Sudan, or maybe marasmus in Sudan. You lack protein, you lack carbohydrates, and that means you don't have food security, which is food shortages. Aid dependency, sometimes you can't produce the food, so you rely on foreign countries giving you food, emergency food drops and stuff. But once that happens, your farmers might get lazy because, oh, I don't need to grow food. They might think they don't need to grow food, and they rely on the aid, which destroys your productivity in your country, destroys any food production. So in the future, if your food aid stops, you're gonna have even worse problems. Riots wise, for example, in the UK in 1816, after a year without a summer, there were food riots because they lacked food, and that put a lot of pressure on the government to make some changes. Migration as well. Some people, they don't just sit there in areas with food shortages. They want to move. They want to improve their conditions. So you get migration away from areas with food shortages to areas with food security. So this sums up food shortages. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next video.